sir.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for the next session, we have with us Dr.
Ma'am, thank
Meenakshi.
you. Yes, so first, okay. So Anjali, ma'am, thank you very much,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
and we will, we will have one short panel discussion session
Yeah,
around
definitely,
4:30,
definitely.
ma'am. 4:30.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I'll,
Okay. Thank you.
yes, yes, yeah. Thank you. Thank
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, Chitra.
So for the next session, we have with us Dr. Meenakshi Garg, who will be talking on nutritional management in PCOS. So before we begin, I would give a short introduction on Dr. Meenakshi. So, as a nutritionist by profession, she has been working with the Manipal Group for more than 26 years. She completed her PhD in nutritional sciences in 2019. She was instrumental in starting the MSc Dietetics and Applied Nutrition program in Vaksha in 2010. She is a PhD co-guide and paper reviewer for Elsevier journals. She has also published 11 research articles in national and international index journals, and she also conducted workshops in nutrition research and health education, and guided over 90 postgraduate research projects. So it's a pleasure to have you here, ma'am. Welcome you.
Hello, ma'am.
Rajiv.
Hi, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Chaitra. Thank you, Dr. Rajiv, for inviting
Thank you,
me
ma'am.
and giving me this opportunity. Very happy because, like you said, we are celebrating the Rashtriya Poshan Maah, but along with that, we have the PCOS Awareness Month as well. And I think somewhere they are linked because when we talk of nutrition, all of these, when we talk of the management, nutrition does come into that. So
Yes, ma'am.
thank you so much. And with that, I will try to share my screen. Please tell me if it is visible.
Sure, ma'am.
You're able to see?
Yeah, it is sharing, ma'am. It will take time. Yeah, it is visible.
Visible? All
Yeah.
right. So before I begin, I would like to thank Dr. Anjali because she has set up the stage very nicely for me, explaining the causes and the consequences. Because when we talk of management, that is what we are going to take a look at and worry about that. So very briefly, touching upon what she already covered, it is one of the most common reproductive disorders affecting 5 to 10% of women in the reproductive age group. And specifically, if I look at the data that is available for India, the percentage prevalence shows a little lower than the global prevalence, but then the incidence is higher, which means that we have more newer cases coming day to day because of the nutrition transition and other modifiable risk factors that are coming into our lives nowadays. And the classical features, just a revision of what you already heard in the previous presentation: menstrual irregularity, biochemical or clinical hyperandrogenism, ultrasound appearance of polycystic ovaries, also linked to infertility. And more generalized symptoms include insulin resistance, acne, hirsutism, male pattern baldness, weight gain, and sleep apnea. Along with that, depression, anxiety symptoms, again associated with higher BMIs and higher waist to hip ratios in women with PCOS. So that's the background, and that's what we have to manage and look at. So management of PCOS will target maintaining a healthy weight, improving or correcting the hormonal imbalances, and preventing reproductive and metabolic complications. So we can manage it through both diet as well as lifestyle interventions, exercise being an integral part of that. This is something that I have taken from Cross and Mahan. This is talking about how do we intervene based on the kind of presentation, because what the patient is going to report, that is what we have to manage. If it is obesity, we have to institute weight management program of both diet and exercise, because when we are looking at controlling weight, we can either increase expenditure or decrease the intake. When we only decrease intake or only increase expenditure, the results are not so good. But when we do a combination of both, the results are not only better, they are steady and they are more long lasting, because we are not going into any kind of a crash management program. If insulin resistance is also reported, which is a risk along with the symptoms that are manifesting, we restrict refined carbohydrates. So we give a low glycemic index food diet, and total calories also will be restricted. We will increase high fiber foods, both soluble as well as insoluble fiber, because insoluble fiber helps in weight control and soluble fiber helps in better glucose control. Recommending small and frequent meals so that the blood glucose management is better. We will also monitor very carefully to ascertain the benefit of high versus low carbohydrate diet, because there are some researchers that have spoken about benefits from carbohydrate percentages going as low as 40 to 45%, but that is something that is debatable, because we also have equally good results with carbohydrate diets between 50 to 55%. Another thing that is recommended is considering supplementation with chromium picolinate. That is the trivalent form of chromium, a supplemental dose that helps to improve insulin resistance. Another thing is that if the patient is presenting with low serum 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels, then supplemental vitamin D3 is also something that can be given, because we know that a deficiency of vitamin D can increase the symptoms of PCOS, including insulin resistance, any ovulatory irregularities, infertility, and also hyperandrogenism. It's a part of the physiological reproductive system, and also it includes the ovarian follicular development. So a deficiency of vitamin D can be corrected by giving a supplement. Another thing that has been suggested is if women present with clomiphene citrate resistant infertility, in that case, there are some papers that have suggested that N-acetyl cysteine can be given as an adjunct treatment, because it's an amino acid derived supplement which might help to improve insulin receptor activity, reduce testosterone, and increase spontaneous ovulation in PCOS. And there are papers that have compared the recommendation of giving NAC versus metformin, and supplementation with NAC has shown better results when it comes to increasing the spontaneous ovulation. Plus, we should remember NAC is not that will take care of the other manifestations like acne or hirsutism. This is only for women who show resistance to clomiphene citrate. So what is the principle of diet that we will follow by and large is restricted calories depending on the weight status of the patient at that point of time, restricting the refined carbohydrates, a diet which is low overall in glycemic load, high fiber, overall total dietary fiber, making sure there is both soluble and insoluble fiber, adequate protein, restricted total fat, but at the same time, we will ensure good amount of omega-3 fatty acids, because we would like to correct any dyslipidemia and improve the blood lipid profile, and adequate amount of vitamins and other minerals. Vitamin D we spoke about, magnesium is another one that is something that we need to take care of, chromium we spoke about, also the B group vitamins, because they help in energy metabolism and release of energy from the macronutrients. And we must remember, a lot of PCOS patients will report fatigue. So we do want to make sure that energy is maintained in those patients. So a low calorie, high fiber diet, weight reduction, and regular physical activity is something that we would like to recommend and keep in mind as the major components of the diet and lifestyle management for PCOS. Now, certain research evidences that are available that have spoken about the importance of nutrition and lifestyle considerations in PCOS management. This is a paper from 2013 where they studied about nutritional management in PCOS. And the study concluded that the PCOS appears to be related to both diet and lifestyle factors, particularly because it influences body weight, insulin resistance, inflammation, oxidative stress, and in turn, the androgen activity. Between 30 to 75% of women with PCOS are obese, and women with PCOS often have excess body fat, particularly central adiposity, that is the accumulation of visceral fat, even in the absence of obesity. So overall obesity, we may judge on the basis of the BMI or the body mass index, but of particular interest to us is the central adiposity, because that is what is going to increase the risk of insulin resistance. So dietary goals should target excess weight and insulin resistance. As this study in 2005 reported, a low-fat plant-based diet causes weight loss and reduces insulin resistance. Again, that is something found in a majority of the women with PCOS. Diets high in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes also reduce oxidative stress and inflammation. Now, another thing, there are 2 studies that are found related to that. A meta-analysis of diet studies also suggests that weight loss improved PCOS symptoms in overweight women regardless of the diet composition. So this is what we need to understand. That's what I was saying earlier. We have to assess whether we really have to go in for a very low carbohydrate diet or a moderate carbohydrate diet is something that can be recommended. We must remember that type is what is of bigger concern to us. Other studies have also shown that losing as little as 5 to 10% of weight loss results in resumption of menstruation and decrease in blood androgen levels. And that is what Dr. Anjali was telling, that even with a slight weight loss, when it starts to happen, resumption of menstruation is something that will start to happen. So some of the steps that we can follow to ensure an improved nutritional management and lifestyle. We start with a daily energy requirement of 1800 to 2200 for sedentary subjects. Again, depending on the basic parameters of the individual with what they are starting and their ideal body weight. And based on that, from here, we will do the modification of how much reduction has to be done. Exercise on a regular basis for at least 30 minutes daily or at least 5 times a week to maintain the body weight. If we have to provoke weight loss or induce weight loss, then prolonged and vigorous exercise is recommended. Restricting saturated fat to less than 10% and making sure that the daily calorie intake of fat is less than 25 to 30 energy percent overall. So this includes both visible as well as invisible fat. Avoid intake of sugars, saturated fats, trans fat, refined carbohydrates, and sweetened beverages. Remember that carbohydrate intake should range between 50 to 55%, but there are researchers that have reported results with a lesser percentage of carbohydrate as well. Increasing dietary fiber by including green leafy vegetables and fruits to prevent obesity. Distributing fruits and vegetables to 5 portions a day. So at least 5 servings. When we increase that, fiber increases, promotes satiety, and you get both types of fiber coming into the diet. Protein is important, but we don't have to go berserk with giving a very high protein diet because that has shown negligible improvement in the parameters, and I'll come to that evidence a little later. Use lean sources of protein rather than the fatty ones. Keep in mind that the daily protein intake should be around 20% of the total calorie intake. Satiety and insulin sensitivity has been reported to be improved by the protein component of the diet. We try to include foods with healthy monounsaturated fatty acids and long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids. Fatty fish like salmon, tuna, mackerel, olive, canola oil, avocados, flax seeds, walnuts, peanuts, chia seeds, basil seeds, etc. are something that we can recommend. Fish twice a week can be recommended, especially the oily fish, and one of them at least oily, or 1 walnut a day to obtain adequate long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids. Specifically, we are looking for omega-3. And if somebody doesn't want to have the walnuts or the fish, then if they are more keen on consuming seeds like the chia seeds or the basil seeds, 1 teaspoon a day minimum is something that can be recommended. Low-fat dairy food can be encouraged because while we want the protein to be consumed, we want to reduce the saturated fat consumption in the daily diet. Maintain regular meal times, avoid frequent snacking. Reduce portion size overall because you need to make sure that the diets are no longer very high in energy, but we don't want them to go hungry. Eating 3 main meals and with 2 healthy snacks are important, and do not skip breakfast or any meal for that matter. Refrain from high calorie food and snacks that cause hyperinsulinemia and may provoke hunger. This is something we usually forget when we ask people for a recall on what food they have been having. Usually fruit juices and alcoholic drinks people forget to report. But remember, these have to be counted in the daily calorie allowance as well. So weight loss does cause health benefits. This can be achieved by restricting at least 200 calories per day from the regular allowance that we calculate for that person. A 500 kilocalorie restriction per day can help in a weight loss of 0.5 kgs per week is what we can achieve from there. So dietary strategies should highlight the need to stick to traditional diets and restrict processed foods which contain high levels of sodium, refined sugar, high fructose corn syrup, trans fat, sweeteners, etc. Fat diets, something that people start adopting because they promise a lot of quick results. Generally should be avoided because they do work in the short term but lack the compliance and benefits in long term. I have come across certain articles that are recommending even keto diets even for PCOS. So that's a different debate we can have some other time. One base with which we can start, and this is something that has proven to be healthy in various metabolic conditions, is the Mediterranean diet. So like many other healthy eating plans, it limits unhealthy fats, emphasizes fruits, vegetables, fish, and whole grains. So these dietary approaches have been found to offer important health benefits in addition to weight loss for people who have other components of insulin resistance and also generally the metabolic syndrome as a whole when we look at it. So I'll not go into details of the Mediterranean diet. This is just to show you, for those of you who are not familiar, that it is recommending a very high focus on fruits and vegetables. Except that when we are talking of PCOS, we just need to be careful that among the fruits we have to choose or help the participants, the subjects that are coming to you, the patients, to choose fruits which are low in glycemic index and load, and I'll come to that a little later. So whole grains, good servings of fruits and vegetables, and reducing overall the red meat in the daily diet. A good place to begin, I would say, is what has been recommended by our own, the dietary guidelines for Indians that have been issued by the ICMR and NIN. Recently, they have upgraded that in 2020, August itself. This is the new My Plate for the day that they have recommended. Very easy when you are counseling. Those of you who are nutrition students are very familiar with this plate concept. Half of that plate there you can see is vegetables and fruits. Within that you can see a good combination of vegetables, leafy vegetables, other vegetables and tubers, and you have the fruits here, and the remaining half of the plate you have the cereals and the millets. Then you have your essential fats and oils, nuts and seeds, and the protein component that is comprising of pulses, eggs and flesh foods, and of course the recommendation of the dairy food. That's about 3 servings per day. So if we had to use that as a base and recommend a diet to individuals for healthy management, whole grains and whole grain wheat products can be 6 to 7 servings per day. One serving is 30 grams, and in terms of the foods that we are consuming, that will translate to either 1 chapati, 1 dosa, 1 slice of bread, half a cup of dry cereal, or 1 cup of cooked rice, porridge and cereal. These are some healthy examples from that cereals and millets category. Whole wheat chapatis, breads, whole grain cereals. Then you have millets like ragi, bajra, jowar. Among cereals, you have rice flakes and you have broken wheat. Then you have oats, pasta, then our boiled rice that we eat here, the brown rice. Pasta is something that has resistant starch, so again helps in controlling the blood sugar. Then you have the vegetables that are recommended 3 to 4 servings per day, and fruits 1 to 2. So together, we would like at least 5 servings in a day in combination. So among vegetables, you have 3 categories. You have leafy vegetables, other vegetables, as well as the root vegetables. 1 serving is 100 grams. So that when you translate to leafy vegetables, that's about 1 cup of raw leafy vegetables, half a cup of cooked vegetable, or half a glass of any freshly squeezed vegetable juice that you may consume. These are good examples of vegetables, and remember, these are not only adding the much needed fiber, they are also adding much needed antioxidants, because we are also worried about the oxidative stress and the inflammation that accompanies any metabolic complications that are likely to happen as a result of PCOS. So a good combination of colors. So we say 5 servings, or we also say 5 colors a day. And again, fruits, there is no restriction that it has to be the more expensive, the better is something that we have to teach people to take care of. Here also, if you notice, I've put the drumstick leaves. I forgot to put the curry leaves, my favorite. That should also be there. Then you have fruits, 1 or 2 in a day. Again, the only thing is that we have to look at foods which have low glycemic index, because there are a lot of studies that have shown us that in PCOS, along with a low calorie diet, when overall glycemic load of the diet is controlled, that helps in improving insulin sensitivity, and overall the short-term and long-term complications are reduced as a result of that. Low fat or fat-free dairy foods, 2 to 3 servings a day, 1 cup of milk or 1 cup of yogurt, or 50 grams of paneer or 30 grams of cheese. Buttermilk, curd, what we use in general at home, are very good alternates if somebody does not like milk directly. Meat, poultry, fish, legumes, or pulses, overall we want 3 to 4 servings a day. So it could be a combination of the two, or if somebody is a vegetarian, they can take all of it from legumes and pulses. So 50 grams of cooked meat, poultry, or fish, or 2 egg whites, half a cup of raw legumes, or 1 cup of cooked pulse or legume is considered as 1 serving, that is 30 grams of raw weight. All pulses, all legumes are recommended. They all have low GI, and they also give varying amounts of fibers that will come along with that. Lean meat, poultry, or fish is something we recommend. Good quality protein will come, and fish is something that will also contribute to good amount of protein, as well as omega-3 in good amounts. We can trim away the visible fat. Poultry can be had without skin. And even the cooking methods, when we teach people, instead of frying, we can teach them how to use roasting or boiling or steaming or grilling options can be taught to people. Another thing that as a COVID-induced habit, I should say, people have started taking healthy nuts and seeds because of the immune boosting properties. 3 times a week is what we can recommend. 1/3 cup of nuts, that's about 15 grams, or 2 teaspoons of the seeds that can be had. So there's a good list of options here. Walnuts, peanuts, again, very good sources of monounsaturated fatty acids, so don't write them off just because they are something available at hand. Almonds, sunflower seeds, very popular, a lot of people are consuming. Flax seeds, again, people are consuming, but it does have an aftertaste, so sometimes it's an acquired taste, everybody may not like it. Pumpkin seeds are again very popular, chia seeds, and then our basil seeds is something that you find more economical to consume as compared to others. So a very quick word on glycemic index and glycemic load. When we are looking at recommendations to tell people what are the foods better to consume, or which will make sure that their blood sugar control is better and the spike in blood sugar does not happen after consuming those foods, looking at the GI value is good, and we classify the foods based on GI values into 3 categories: high GI, moderate GI, and low glycemic index. So glycemic index is something that tells us the extent to which there will be a spike in the blood glucose after you consume a particular food in response to the amount of carbohydrate that you are consuming from that food. So a low GI food is something that has a glycemic index of less than 55, moderate is between 56 to 69, and high glycemic index is more than 70. Having said that, using only glycemic index alone as an indicator sometimes might be misleading, because there are some foods which have a high glycemic index, but better if you calculate the glycemic load. If you look at the standardized tables and you look at the internet, you will find glycemic index of food is something that is a standard value that will be available. To calculate glycemic load is easy. Once you know the glycemic index of a food, glycemic index divided by 100 multiplied by the amount of available carbohydrate or the net carbohydrate. So what do we mean by that? The amount of carbohydrate in the amount of food that you are consuming that is available for utilization by the body. That is the amount of carbohydrate that you would need to know in order to calculate the glycemic load for a particular food. So this is a better indicator because it is going to tell you how much of the carbohydrate that is present in the food that you are consuming and how each gram of that is raising the blood sugar level. So in general, when we do a classification of that, Foods which have a glycemic load of less than 10 are considered as good. 10 to 19 is a moderate glycemic load, and any food which has per serving, if the glycemic load is higher than 20, then it is considered as a high glycemic load food. So I will show you a table which has a few examples, and the first one itself, if you try to calculate, you will understand what I was telling you. Peanuts have a glycemic index of 14. The amount of available carbohydrate is 113 grams, that is in 100 grams. The net carbohydrate, that is in 113 grams. Net carbohydrate present in 113 grams of peanuts is 15 grams. So now if I want to calculate the glycemic load, what do? Glycemic index, that is 14 divided by 100 multiplied by 15, because that's the amount of carbohydrate, the net available carbohydrate I'm going to consume from this much of peanuts that I'm going to consume. So when you do that simple maths, you will come to a value of 2.1. So that is rounded off to 2. So that this is something you can calculate. If you know the glycemic index, if you know the amount that you are consuming of that particular food, and you know the amount of net carbohydrate that is present, this is something you can get from food composition tables. And for India, we have the Indian food composition tables, and wherever we are working, the food composition tables will always give us the amount of carbohydrate present. So this is minus the fiber. That is not something we will count in that, and calculate the glycemic load. So if you see that list that is here, by and large, it is a good index to use. But remember, there are certain, why glycemic load becomes low or high will depend on how much is the presence of certain components in that food. So if a food has high amount of fiber and high amount of water, the glycemic load of that food will come down, because for that much of weight of food that you are consuming, the net available carbohydrate is less. But there are other components that will increase the value of GL. So if overall net carbohydrate is high, GL will be high. Another thing that may reduce the GL, so net carbohydrate may be low, but in that food, so glycemic load will show less, but it has a high amount of fat. Now, does that become a good choice? Definitely no. But there are also examples where those of you who are nutrition students must have heard this example very often. For watermelon, it has a very high glycemic index, but the glycemic load for watermelon is low. So this is for 154 grams of watermelon is 8. If you take one serving of 100, it will come down even further to about 5 to 6. Now, another thing that you will notice here, ice cream has a glycemic load of 10. Okay? Now, we said around 10 is a good glycemic load. So does that make ice cream a good choice to be recommended for somebody who has PCOS or is at risk of metabolic syndrome? No. So while we are looking at the glycemic load and the glycemic index, at the same time, we should be careful what is it that we are going to recommend based on the other restrictions that we have. So if you put all that together, what are the recommendations and what are the strategies that we are looking at? Limiting energy intake from saturated fats as well as trans fats, because we are looking at the dyslipidemia risk as well. Consume low-fat dairy and animal foods. Engage in regular physical activity. Increase the consumption of whole grains, legumes, fruits and vegetables. Will help to increase fiber, and also remember, it will also increase satiety. And it is important because if you are going to do a calorie restriction and if you don't give them enough to fill their stomachs, then compliance to a low-calorie diet will be poor. So make sure that there is enough fiber and also there is enough fluid. When you increase fiber, you also increase fluid. Limit the sugar consumption, limit high GI and high GL foods, and achieve energy balance and ideal body weight. So like I said in the beginning, energy balance can be achieved either by increasing expenditure or decreasing intake. Ideal way is to do a combination of the two strategies and try and achieve the ideal body weight for an individual. So what is an ideal body weight and how we calculate very quickly, revision for some of you, may be news for the others. Before I go to that, when we recommend nutritional management or dietary recommendations, we should also see the evidence for that, because are we only saying theoretically, or is it also showing some evidence to tell us that it is actually useful or is it beneficial or not? So I found a systematic review. This is from the International Journal of Food Safety, Nutrition and Public Health. Here, very nicely, if you see the division that is there, what are the factors, the macros that are having a positive impact on PCOS? So among fats, when we increase the unsaturated fats and we concentrate on consuming more of long chain polyunsaturated fatty acids with omega-3 and also the monounsaturated fatty acids. It has shown to improve insulin sensitivity, decrease risk of CVD and other heart diseases, improved blood cholesterol and blood pressure values. In carbohydrates, low GI foods and high fiber at the same time will improve insulin sensitivity, decrease the postprandial hyperglycemia, decrease triglyceride levels, and generally improve the blood lipid profile. Protein, when we give adequate to meet the RDA, that is about anywhere between 15 to 20% of the total energy percent, it will increase satiety, it will increase postprandial thermogenesis, lowers abdominal fat, and protects lean body tissue, which is essential for the PCOS metabolism. The second category of evidence is related to these same components that have either negative or a negligible impact on PCOS. Negative impact is for saturated fat and trans fat. Ovulatory infertility, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes and heart disease risk will be high. Because when you're taking a lot of saturated fat and total fat is high in the diet and a lot of refined carbohydrate is there, it will increase not only the risk of weight gain overall, but also the increase of central body obesity, which then becomes a risk factor for insulin resistance. So increased insulin resistance and risk of type 2 diabetes. They have quoted one study in that is 2003, which is not a negative effect, but it is a negligible effect of a high protein diet, which shows only very minor differential improvements in high density lipoproteins, that is HDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, and also the area under the curve for glucose, that is the glycemic control. So again, the point to say is that we don't have to go berserk with giving a very high protein diet. What are the quantities to be consumed? Saturated fat restrict to less than 10% of the total calories, unsaturated fat less than 20%. So overall, like we said in the beginning, 25 to 30% less than that is the total energy percent that should come from fat. Carbohydrate, research has shown that a low carbohydrate diet should be followed. The evidence is there for between 45 to 55% of energy coming from carbohydrate. But remember, more importantly is the type of carbohydrate. So take a low GI and a low GL diet is what we will recommend for a short term. Now, I told you how much should be the glycemic load for a particular food. When you calculate for a day, because we always have to calculate the overall balance for the day, if for a day, if you can achieve a glycemic load through the entire day's diet less than 80 for the day, that is ideal. But that is, practically speaking, becomes very difficult sometimes if you have to give moderate calorie diets. So next, between 80 to 120 we say is low to moderate. Above 120 is considered a bad diet because that becomes a very high glycemic load diet, and protein, about 20% of the total calorie intake is what can be recommended. So coming to the second part of that is lifestyle and physical activity. I will go a little quickly through that because Dr. Anjali covered a bit of it. Lifestyle modifications, including increasing physical activity, is the first line of approach in managing PCOS. So regular exercise should be promoted to increase energy expenditure, achieve weight loss, and also to increase insulin sensitivity. This is a study from in 2012 from Neti et al. Development towards an improved hormonal profile, specifically sex hormone binding globulin and LH, FSH occurred parallel to weight loss. This suggests that exercise and nutritional counseling may improve the metabolic and reproductive abnormalities associated with PCOS. Short-term weight loss has been consistently successful in reducing insulin resistance and restoring ovulation and fertility. That is another study from 92. Institution of physical activity needs to be gradual and graded. So we have to be very careful. For somebody who has not been doing exercise at all, we have to initiate little at a time. At least 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity on most days of the week can be recommended. Initially, we have to tell them by starting walking and then slowly increase the endurance and the intensity of the activities. A healthy weight loss is 0.5 to 1 kg per week. More than that, and especially if it happens suddenly, we know that somebody is following a crash diet or a fat diet, and it would probably be more of a water loss rather than a fat loss. This is something I always show in my class. It's a physical activity pyramid wherein very simple advice and tips that we have to tell increasing day-to-day physical activity. So increasing manual household work like that we do at home. During COVID times, I think that has increased for a lot of people. Then when in workplaces or in other commercial spaces, take the stairs, avoid the elevators, avoid vehicles for short distances, avoid usage of remote controls. Now that is something I don't think people follow, but every time if you have to get up to change a channel, imagine how many times you will get up when you're watching TV alone. Then 5 to 6 days a week, aerobic activities can be recommended. 2 to 3 days a week, some recreation sports or group sports or active leisure activities, and very occasional TV viewing and computer games. Easier said than done. Very quick revision of the benefits of physical activity or losing weight. Women with PCOS have great effect on their health if they do regular exercise. Even little but regular exercise will help in reducing weight and improve the lean muscle mass, which is important, and we want to do that. 15 to 30 minutes of moderate exercise daily will reduce total body fat percentage over a period of time and improve insulin sensitivity. So this is important. And there are papers that have spoken about the measurement of skin fold thickness and specific body points to calculate the body fat percentage. Exercise is also known to decrease the risk of type 2 diabetes. We know insulin resistance when it comes down, the central body obesity when it comes down will have long-term impacts. Also exercise, that is one thing that will also increase the HDL cholesterol. It decreases mood swings, boosts energy, promotes better sleep quality, reduces stress and anxiety, also eases back muscle and joint pain, tones the muscles, so overall improves the flexibility, increases emotional health and well-being, and prevents or manages mild to moderate depression as well. Some of the examples of moderate physical activity that we can recommend: brisk walking to start with at a slow pace, then increase it to a brisk walk for 30 to 40 minutes, swimming at medium pace for about 20 minutes, cycling for pleasure or for transportation, volleyball 45 minutes, gardening 30 to 45 minutes, that is active gardening, home care, that is cleaning at home, daily work, basketball, because that's a little more intense, so 15 to 20 minutes, rope skipping, again something good that we can recommend people to do at home, 15 to 20 minutes if done continuously, and social dancing, so hobby ka hobby and exercise ka exercise. Now, burning junk food is not easy. This is from the Fit India campaign of the Government of India. They have released a very good booklet. I'm sorry, I could have put the link here, but if you just search in Google, you will be able to find that. So very nicely, they have tried to tell us that when we eat processed foods in very high calories, in order to burn that much of calories, how much is the amount of physical activity that is required. So if you want to indulge, take in some discretionary calories and have a cheat meal once in a while, remember the physical activity commensurate to that has to be increased, because then you will not be storing it and you can burn the calories that you have consumed. So Dr. Anjali mentioned the body mass index. All nutrition students, I think if we even wake you up in the night and sleep, you will tell us what is BMI and what is the formula for body mass index. Weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squares. Please do remember that there are two criteria and cutoffs. One is the WHO criteria, and second, what we should be using is the Asian criteria because of the Asian phenotype and the type of body composition that we as Indians and Asians have. So the additional cutoff points that we have for the Asian criteria, the normal range is between 18.5 to 22.9, and from 23 onwards is what we consider as overweight. Whereas if you see the WHO criteria, the cutoff for overweight starts from a BMI of 25. Waist circumference is important, and we have to teach people how to do a measurement of their waist circumference if they are not available with you at this point and you can't do it for them. So you have to teach them how to do that. And these are the cutoffs for interpreting the waist circumference. And these are explaining to us that when that waist circumference increases, we know the central body adiposity is increasing, the visceral fat is increasing. And when that increases, then the receptors do not function, and resultantly insulin resistance becomes higher and higher. So when we calculate how many calories to give a person, or if you tell, let us say they calculate based on BMI, they calculate that they are overweight. Now, how much overweight are they and how much should they be controlling. So for calculation of ideal body weight, one of the simple ones that can be used if you don't want to go into the calculations is what we call as the Broca's index. Ideal body weight by Broca's index is a person's height in centimeters minus 100. So if somebody's height is 157 centimeters, you minus 100 for them. From there, 57 kgs would be their ideal body weight. But the correct formula equations that we use for calculation of ideal body weight, both for men and women, is something that I have given here. That is for the women, for the first 5 feet, 100 pounds. For every additional 1 inch beyond 5 feet, we add on 5 pounds. For men, the first 5 feet, 106 pounds, and for every additional 1 inches, adding 6 pounds. So for example, you want to calculate ideal body weight for a female whose height is 5 feet 4 inches. So first 5 feet, 100 pounds. Next 4 inches, for every 1 inch, we are adding 5 pounds. So 4 into 5, 20 pounds. Total ideal body weight is 120 pounds. How to convert that to kilograms? 1 pound is equal to 2.2 kilograms. So 120 pounds divided by 2.2 will give you the ideal body weight. That is, for a woman who is, or a female who is 5 feet 4 inches, her ideal body weight would be 54.5 kgs. Yesterday, day before, we have new guidelines that have come in from the ICMR. So we will be revisiting some of these recommendations as well. So overall, diet, behavior modification, and lifestyle changes. Remember, habits once acquired are the most difficult to change. So we should start as early as possible. It is essential to identify maladaptive behavior related to eating habits and rewards, especially in children and young adults, because if we catch them young, we can prevent some of those risks from happening. Along with alcohol consumption, another thing that we have to recommend in lifestyle modification is to avoid smoking. And we have some research related to that as well. Reduce stress by engaging in deep breathing, yoga, and meditation. Yoga, a lot of papers within exercise recommendation, yoga and meditation has shown to have better impact overall. So it is essential that corrective measures continue even after improvement in symptoms, biochemical and clinical parameters. This is just how we tell people when they take antibiotic. After the first 2 days, suddenly there is improvement in symptoms. So what happens after that? Taking, not taking. After that, the compliance becomes low, and that is when it becomes more risky. Just wanted to share a study that we had done, and we completed that in 2018 end. This was 2 of my 2017 batch students, Saujanya and Suvidha. So we wanted to compare the improvement in the impact of diet and lifestyle on symptoms of PCOS in females aged 18 to 35 years, pre, during, and post intervention. Intervention was in the form of extensive counseling. So to compare the effect of extensive counseling among the experimental and control groups. And we also wanted to see if there would be any change in their dietary patterns and lifestyle habits among the 2 groups, pre and post intervention. So we had 40 participants, and we took them from the OBGYN OPD of Kasturba Hospital, Manipal, and Dr. TMA Pai Hospital, Udupi. Our collaborators here were Dr. Shamala, Dr. Manohar Pai, and Dr. Pradap Kumar from KH Manipal, and Dr. Parvati Bhatt from Dr. TMA Pai Hospital, Udupi. This was presented at the Mahe Student Research Forum Research Colloquium in 2019, and Saujanya and Suvidha had won 3rd prize for that presentation. So these are participants between 25 to 30 years. Most of them had a sedentary lifestyle, which we calculated based on the physical activity levels. Most of them had a family history of obesity. And even pre-intervention, what we found was that the mean nutrient intakes of energy, protein, carbohydrate, fat, overall, the micronutrients were significantly lower than the RDA. After intervention of 12 weeks, so we had a 3 months intervention period. Out of the 40, we had 20 in the intervention group and 20 in the control group. So after 12 weeks, we did statistically, when we tested using the repeated measures, there was a significant difference in weight, BMI, and hormone levels, specifically for FSH and AMH, among the experimental and control group, pre and post intervention. We also found a significant improvement and a difference in daily intake of vitamin C, cereals, green leafy vegetables, and fruits among the experimental and the control group. Now, interestingly, what we found was that although there was a reduction in the skin fold thickness, and also there was an improvement in the PCOS symptoms and emotional changes, in the experimental group, it was not significant because we have to understand certain changes take time to manifest. We cannot expect miracles in 3 months. But within the 3 months, those of them who followed the counseling and did implement some of the recommendations that were given, and for exercise, we had specifically done a regime of yoga postures for them and explained to them 20 to 25 minutes of yoga and meditation on a daily basis. For the experimental group, a specific booklet and demo was given for them. So we found, and so that's what we understood from that study, that when you do intervene and when you do give counseling, diet and lifestyle intervention modification will help in improvement of symptoms, and in the long term it may help also. So in summary, environmental factors implicated in PCOS are poor dietary intake, sedentary lifestyle, mood swings, etc., which play a major role. Obesity or excess weight is the chronic cause of PCOD in many countries. Weight gain and fat accumulation are major factors. PCOS can be reversible with weight loss and lifestyle modifications like exercise and also following a healthy diet. Reducing waist and waist circumference will be helpful in reducing the risk of PCOS. We can effectively manage it with dietary changes, weight loss, and medical therapies. Diets that are low in fat and high in fiber are likely to achieve the best results, particularly when coupled with exercises. Families of affected patients would do well to adopt a similar diet and increased exercise so that the adherence for the patient is higher. Remember, when a lot of people or the family is doing it together, it's a very big motivating factor, and overall the health benefits will come to everybody. So extensive nutrition counseling regarding consistent diet and lifestyle modifications along with regular physical activity will be effectively beneficial. This will help in managing the metabolic and reproductive anomalies which are concomitant with PCOS and prevent long-term complications like infertility in young females. So I would like to end this talk by showing you this infographic that gives the final and summarized recommendations for nutritional management. And I would like to once again thank Dr. Ajit Singh, Chaitra, Climate Research Solutions, and also all the delegates for registering and joining this workshop. Thank you all so much for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So it was really a wonderful talk, and we came to know very many new things from the dietary part, how to manage PCOS, and not only dietary part, about the nutritious thali. So I was very keen to learn about that. It was very good. So I'll go for some questions, ma'am, from the chat. Someone is asking about the keto and Atkins diet. Is it helpful in PCOS?
I can't hear you very clearly.
Okay.
Can you please repeat that, Dr. Ajit? Your voice is very faint. Can you hear me?
Yeah, ma'am. Yes. So, ma'am, someone is asking about the keto diet.
No, that's what I said in between, that
helpful?
I have read some articles wherein they are recommending, because it's like keto diet can be recommended for everybody now. And that's not something we will recommend for PCOS patients. And if at all, there are some success stories with keto diets in short term that have been recommended. But remember, it has to be decided on a case-to-case basis. But generally, our recommendation is not for a keto diet. As a blanket, if you ask me,
Okay.
it's not something that we will recommend.
Okay. So, what are the anti-estrogen foods? Is soybean a food to be restricted in PCOS?
Sorry.
Soybean, ma'am. Soybean. One sec. I'll just remove this.
I really
one
can't
sec,
hear
ma'am.
you. Can
Yes.
can I access the chat box? Hello? Yes, Dr. Ajit.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you better now. Yes.
One second, ma'am. I think there is some problem.
I can hear you now.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Ajit, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello.
Am I audible?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. Ma'am, am I?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. So, ma'am, I'm asking. Okay, someone is asking about this. What is the question? Where's the question gone? Yeah, what are the anti-estrogen foods, and is soybean a food to be restricted in PCOS patients?
See, that has two answers to that. Soya bean is known to reduce androgen levels. So usually it's not something that we say that don't have, but like we were talking earlier, if there is a link with hypothyroidism also, in that case, sometimes we may have to take a decision whether to recommend soya bean or not to recommend soya bean.
Okay, so it's now next question is seed cycling using flax seed, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, and sunflower seed effective in PCOS?
Sorry, can you please bring it closer, the mic to your...
Yeah. No, someone is asking about the flax seeds, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, and sunflower seeds, whether these are effective in PCOS or not.
If we have to increase the omega-3 content in somebody's diet, in that case, it will be effective. Because the reason we are going to give that is to make sure that to increase omega-3. So usually we will recommend flax seeds, or we can say chia seeds or walnuts, or even basil seeds can be recommended.
So what are your views about fasting, ma'am? Intermittent fasting, does it help in PCOS?
No, because if you look at the recommendation that we are giving, small frequent meals is what we are recommending. Because any point of time when you are going to, unless and until somebody, when it comes to weight loss, that is what we said, people will go for different strategies for weight loss. Weight loss is the target. That is what you want to achieve. But for achieving that weight loss, you do not have to restrict yourself or you do not have to starve yourself. That is not at all necessary. Excess of everything is bad. So if we can teach portion control and if we can teach small frequent meals, so overall, when you do that, that helps in better control overall. So glycemic control will also be better, and that will also not only lead to weight loss, it will also lead to sustained weight loss. Because you should always start a regime, whether it is diet or exercise or lifestyle, something which will sustain for a long period of time. Anything that we don't do in that manner, after a while, when you go back to whatever, it becomes a yo-yo pattern. And whatever benefit you had in the short term, it will reverse very quickly. It will reverse.
Right. Okay, so one more question we have, ma'am. It is about does the same dietary recommendations apply to the lean PCOS patient?
Sorry?
Lean PCOS patients.
Does
The
it apply
PCOS
to
patient.
people who are thin also?
Yeah.
Yes. So when it comes to the people who are thinner, we must understand that the metabolic implications is what we are looking at. In those people, we may not go for a very low calorie restriction. That is not something we will do. So that is what we said when we are saying that balancing that carbohydrate, a low or a high or a medium carbohydrate, in a person for whom extensive calorie restriction is needed. In that case, we can take the carbohydrate to as low as 45 to 50%. But somebody who is not requiring so much of weight loss, but at the same time, we want to make sure that glycemic control and other parameters are also taken care of, then we will not do so much of calorie reduction, but the type of carbohydrate we will still manage for them also. Yeah. Again, just because they are lean, we can't say that, okay, you can have saturated fat, you can have trans fat, you can have refined sugar. So the principle will remain the same. The quantities is what we can juggle.
Okay. So if anyone wants to ask question, they can raise their hand and ask the question. Someone from the audience.